Picture this. You are Isabeau, the daughter of a poor farmer in the French countryside. It is the year 1348. You are 15 years old, and the scent of smoke and spring hay hangs thick in the air. The bells of the local monastery toll across the valley, signaling the hour for vespers. But inside your home, your mother is sobbing, not because someone has died, not yet, but because today, your father has traded you. Not for coins, not for land, for mercy. The local baron has forgiven a tax debt, and the price is you. Tonight, you will be taken from your home and delivered to the Lord's estate, where you will serve, on paper, as a maid, but everyone in your village knows what that means. There is no contract, no protection, no age of consent. In medieval Europe, your body is no longer your own. And that is only the beginning. The medieval era, often cloaked in romantic myths of knights and chivalry, was a time of brutal contradiction. Public displays of piety masked private depravity. Religious institutions preached purity while housing abuse. And for women, especially poor, young, unmarried women, sexual violence wasn't just common, it was normalized. In medieval law, a woman's body was a resource to be managed. Virginity had market value. Brides who were not intact could be returned, like spoiled goods. Fathers, lords, and abbots all had legal and moral control over a woman's chastity, not because it protected her, but because it protected their reputation, their power, and their bloodline. But what no one tells you, what no textbook will admit, is how horrific some of these practices truly were. Because when power is absolute, cruelty becomes custom, and in the medieval world, sex was rarely about love, it was about control. You are taken to the manor in silence. No one speaks to you. You are scrubbed clean by older maids, dressed in a coarse linen shift, and told to wait in a chamber with no windows. The baron enters after nightfall. He does not ask your name. He does not speak. What happens next is not punishment. It is a ritual, one that has happened many times before and will happen again. It is the droit du seigneur, the right of the Lord. Historians still debate whether the custom was legal fact or unofficial terror. But survivors told the truth with their eyes. On the night of her wedding, a peasant bride was sometimes claimed by the noble lord, who would sleep with her before her husband could. It was justified as tradition, a demonstration of power, a humiliation disguised as celebration. You are not married, but tonight the baron claims his right anyway, and there will be no justice, because the man who defiles you is the man who decides what is lawful. In the weeks that follow, you are not alone in your suffering. The manor's servants, many of them girls your age, have similar stories. The kitchen maid, the laundress, even the priest's young niece sent to learn piety in the Lord's house. All carry the same hollow look. All walk with the same cautious silence. Some of them are pregnant. Some of them do not survive. When their bodies give out from miscarriage or illness, they are buried quickly, quietly, under wooden crosses with no names. Their stories are never told. And this horror is not limited to manors. In monasteries, convents, and abbeys across Europe, the veil of religious purity concealed a darker reality. Nuns were often forced into vows they did not choose. Girls as young as 12 were cloistered behind stone walls, where some were treated as spiritual brides, while others were preyed upon by the very monks and abbots meant to protect them. There are letters from the 12th century, banned, buried, rediscovered centuries later, that speak of nuns who died from forced abortions, of monks who kept women in hidden cells beneath the chapel floor, of priests who promised absolution in exchange for submission. And the church, in many cases, turned away, because as long as silence was maintained, sin could be sanctified. The first time you hear the chants from beneath the chapel floor, you think it's a dream. Low voices, Latin hymns, barely audible, rising from stone. But you are not dreaming, you are listening. Because this abbey has secrets. You were brought here 3 months ago after your pregnancy began to show. The baron's steward said the nuns would cleanse your soul. In truth, they would hide your shame. But it is not your shame they hide, it is his. Behind these walls, you wear a veil not of faith, but of silence. You rise at matins, recite your prayers, and scrub blood from altar cloths, all while your belly swells beneath your robes. No one asks if you consented, because in the medieval church, the question of consent rarely existed. In theory, priests were celibate, nuns were chaste, monks lived in purity. But in practice, Abuse ran rampant beneath the cassocks and cloisters. There are records, hidden, fragmented, denied for centuries, of abbots keeping concubines within monasteries, of entire convents run as brothels. In 1274, the Second Council of Lyon issued a desperate command. All clergy who kept women were to be punished. But the punishments were light. Most returned to their posts, others were transferred. And the women? They were punished harder. Some were flogged publicly for seducing a priest, others were banished from holy grounds, shamed as whores. The fact that they were often children didn't matter. The church called them vessels of temptation, their presence was the sin, and the worst horrors were justified through theology. Medieval scholars believed women were the weaker sex, more prone to lust, less capable of spiritual resistance. The writings of Saint Jerome, Tertullian, and even Augustine warned of female flesh as dangerous, unclean, a doorway for demons. So when a monk forced himself on a girl in a confessional, it was her soul that was questioned. You are forced to deliver in the convent infirmary. Your cries are muffled by linen stuffed into your mouth. You are not allowed to speak the baron's name. The midwife, herself a former nun, warns you that if the child lives, it will be taken, not adopted, taken. Because a child born of sin cannot remain in the house of God. And when your daughter finally arrives, slick with blood and too quiet, the sisters do not let you hold her. They baptize her without your consent. And then she is gone. You never learn where. Some children were left at monastery gates, others given to foundling homes, where many died from disease or starvation, and still others were used, quietly, systematically. In the 14th century, letters from the papal archives show that orphan children, especially girls, were sometimes bound in obedience to monastic households. It meant servitude. In some cases it meant worse, and you are told to pray, to thank God for His mercy, to confess your lust. But inside, something is dying. Not your faith in God, but your faith in men who claim to speak for Him. And outside the convent, the sickness spreads. Not disease, but belief. Because medieval medicine too believed in the weakness of female flesh. Doctors, if they could be called that, believed that a woman's womb wandered inside her body like an animal. That sexual intercourse was necessary to keep her humors balanced. That if a woman didn't marry and bear children, her body would become toxic. And so, in some towns, poor women were assigned to men, not married, assigned. For their health, a woman who resisted could be accused of hysteria, witchcraft, or even demonic possession. And if she confessed, she might be cured with forced intercourse. They called it therapeutic penetration. You call it what it is. Rape, blessed by medicine and scripture. This is the world you now inhabit, where virginity is a currency, where violation is disguised as salvation, where your silence is the only thing keeping you alive. Before we continue, if you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be told, hit the like button to support this channel. Subscribe for more unfiltered history and comment where you're listening from. These voices were silenced for centuries. Together, we can make sure they're finally heard. And still, there is more to uncover. Because the medieval world did not reserve cruelty only for the poor. Even queens, noblewomen, and educated ladies faced their own cages, ones made of silk and gold. And the horrors didn't end with forced touch. They continued into marriage, medicine, and execution. You are now 17. The Baron has married you, officially. Not out of affection, but necessity. After your daughter vanished into silence and the rumors began to swirl in court, he needed a way to restore his honor. A wife, however tarnished, was still a legal shield. And you, with no family to defend you, were the perfect choice. The wedding was brief. You wore white linen, not by tradition, but because your former garments were stained and unfit. The priest mumbled a blessing, and the steward signed the registry. You were now a wife, a noble one, technically. But in the medieval world, marriage did not protect women from sexual violence. It legalized it. In the eyes of the church, a wife could not deny her husband his marital rights. There was no concept of consent within wedlock. Theologians described sex as a duty, debitum conjugal, a sacred obligation. To refuse was to sin. You learn this the hard way. He visits you even when you are sick, even when you cry, even when you beg. And when you resist, he reminds you that your body is his now, that a man who controls your dowry, your food, and your social standing controls everything. You think back to a story you once heard, whispered between two midwives in the convent. The tale of a noblewoman whose husband accused her of sorcery because she refused his advances. She was burned at the stake. The message is clear. You comply, but the torment of marriage is not always physical. It is also ritualized humiliation. In noble courts across Europe, women were subjected to purity tests designed to protect male honor. Before a wedding, a bride might be inspected, literally, by a midwife or priest to confirm her virginity. This could include invasive examinations, washing ceremonies, or forced declarations before witnesses. A single accusation from a husband, she was not pure, could annul the marriage and ruin a woman's reputation forever. And if a woman dared accuse him of impotence or cruelty, she was branded a liar, or worse, delusional. In one infamous case, recorded in 14th century Florence, a noblewoman named Isotta claimed her husband was impotent. The court forced him to prove his virility by publicly arousing himself before witnesses. He failed, so the court ruled that Isotta must be the problem. She was sent to a convent. He remarried, and then there is medicine. You fall ill, pain in your stomach, bleeding that will not stop. The physician comes, a man in red robes, heavy with herbs and theories from Galen and Avicenna. He does not speak to you. He speaks to your husband. He says your womb is rebellious. He says it must be pacified. You are bled, cupped, purged with herbs so bitter you vomit for days. You are told to lie still and let the humors rebalance. And if you do not heal, they will try other things. They whisper of internal surgeries, brutal, unwashed tools that leave women screaming. They speak of cauterizing wombs with hot irons, of inserting strange devices to correct wandering organs. It is not healing, it is punishment for being female. And even when the illness passes, the fear remains. But the church tells you to be grateful, to serve your husband, to bear more children. You try, again and again, but your body is tired, and the children, they do not stay. You lose another and another. And then the whispers return. She is cursed. She is barren. She has brought sin into the house. They blame your soul for the deaths of your children, not infection, not malnutrition, not the absence of real care. But you, and as always, the men in robes, hold the final word. You begin to understand what all medieval women must eventually learn, that silence is not safety, that obedience does not guarantee peace, that power, true power, must be taken, carefully, quietly, without asking, and so you begin to resist, not with open rebellion, but with subtle disobedience. You speak Latin now, taught by a dismissed chaplain who pitied you. You understand the letters your husband cannot read. You begin copying legal codes, learning the laws that govern your body, learning how to bend them. You poison no one. You seduce no one. You simply learn. And that alone, in this world, is an act of war. You also begin to listen, really listen, to the maid who saw a priest slip into a girl's chamber, to the laundress who gave birth alone, weeping in the orchard, to the herbalist who speaks of elixirs that cause bleeding when taken with hot wine. These women are not criminals, they are survivors. And you are one of them now. You are now 32. Your skin carries the paleness of candlelight, the fine lines of sorrow. You've survived childbirth, silence, infection, and a husband's cruel mercy. And though your world has never widened beyond a single province, your understanding of it now stretches farther than ever before. And so has your resolve. The Baron, your husband, is dead. A hunting accident, they said. His horse startled, the ground wet with frost, the fall fatal. Some whisper it was no accident. You say nothing. You only nod and receive the visitors who come to offer condolences. But inside, your mind is already working. Because in death, he has given you the only true freedom he ever allowed, widowhood. As a widow with surviving wealth, you are now the legal head of your estate. The children are gone, dead or scattered, but the land remains. The title, while weakened, is still yours. And the library, small, hidden, left to rot, is now unlocked. There, in dust-choked volumes and scrolls, you find the evidence of centuries of forgotten women. You begin to write, not as a noblewoman, not as a wife, but as someone who has seen the machinery from within. You copy fragments from legal texts about dower rights, a woman's entitlement to a portion of her husband's estate. You pen commentary on the Benedictine rule. challenging its contradictions. You recount stories whispered in corners: the nun who escaped the convent, the servant girl who carried an herbal pouch sewn into her skirt to prevent pregnancy, the midwife who warned her patients in rhymes so the men wouldn't understand. You write them down, you write them all down, because that is what the church feared most. Not seduction, not sorcery, but memory. You also begin to gather, not weapons, not men, but women. One by one they come, some broken, some furious, all quietly burning. You offer them something more radical than vengeance: literacy, knowledge, and eventually safety. You open the cellar beneath the chapel, a space once used to store wine, and turn it into a hidden chamber of learning. There are no priests here, no lords, only parchment, quills, and the low murmur of women learning how to read their own worth. They come from the convent, the manor, the brothel. You do not ask how they survived. You simply say, "You're not alone anymore." Some bring stories, some bring herbs, some bring scars so deep you dare not ask who gave them, but all bring truth. And together you build something greater than any cathedral. A network. You hear word of others like you in distant cities. In Bologna, a female physician writes quietly under her brother's name. In York, a group of widows petition the bishop to reclaim stolen land and win. In Prague, a nun is caught translating banned texts into the vernacular, and though she is imprisoned, her writings spread across Europe on folded scraps of parchment. You smile, because you know now what was done to you was never holy, never noble, never necessary. It was horror, wrapped in law, wrapped in custom, wrapped in silence. But silence breaks, even stone cracks given time. As the years pass, you are called eccentric, unwomanly, witch. They come to investigate once, 2 priests from the diocese. They ask what goes on in the chapel basement. You serve them wine. Let them bless the books. Smile softly. They do not understand Latin well enough to read what's actually written. And they never return. You are now 51. The girls you once taught are women now. Some still visit, others have gone on to teach more. A few carry your writings tucked beneath their gowns, smuggled across rivers and borders. You hear that one copy made it to Paris. You do not need fame. You only need survival. And then, one spring evening, a girl arrives at your door. No older than you were when it all began. Eyes wide, hands trembling, dirty feet, silent mouth. She carries no luggage, only a small cloth pouch. Inside, a strip of fabric stained with blood. And a small handwritten note that simply reads, "You were right. You say nothing." You take her inside, and you begin again. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or remember, leave a comment below. Because history is not just battles and kings. It's the blood of the voiceless. It's the silence between scripture and law. It's the girl who was never asked, and the woman who remembered everything. Subscribe to this channel for more truths history tried to bury, because it's time we remembered